Hi, this is Roger Green, host of the Suffering the MASH Tsunami podcast. This week we're offering 5 conversations from episode 22, our discussion on the Healthy Livers, Healthy Lives Coalition, stemming from a presentation at the EASL Congress, joined by Jörn Schattenberg, Louise Campbell, and Coalition Chair Jeff Lazarus. From the vault, we have a discussion from 2023, how regulators and some providers hear and process patients' needs. This conversation introduces the Healthy Livers, Healthy Lives initiative. Jeff starts by contrasting the high levels of excitement and enthusiasm within hepatology and the SLD community, which he describes as, and I quote, a bit of a bubble, unquote, to a broad lack of awareness in the wider medical and public health, public policy worlds. To that end, Healthy Livers, Healthy Lives focuses on broadening awareness of the SLD tsunami in 2 directions: to high-level government and global leadership organizations like the WHO, and in addition to other specialties who treat diseases and conditions closely linked with MASLD and MASH, the obvious 2, endocrinology, obesity management, and going further, primary care and cardiology. Jörn concurs with the vision. He praises Jeff for the 4 to 5 years of work that went into building a global multi-stakeholder coalition and proceeds to focus on implications for cardiology. Today, he says, cardiologists need to do more than simply stop statins when liver enzymes get too high. Note, that might not be the right thing to do, period. But at any rate, to Jörn, what cardiologists need to understand is disease burden, quality of life impact, and management aspects, particularly those related to cardiovascular disease. He asks Jeff what we can learn from Jeff's earlier experiences with HIV and hepatitis. Jeff notes the importance of working with, as he puts it, quote, clinicians alongside patient advocates, end of quote. He stresses the importance also of professional societies who have the unique potential to access ministries of health, the World Health Organization, and others in ways that can create and drive large collaborations and better solutions. Louise notes that hepatology deals with liver disease only when it's advanced SLD. She asks what learnings we can take from HIV and Hep C about making inroads in less advanced disease. Jeff discusses one Healthy Liver, Healthy Lives program to double the diagnosis in a 3 to 5 year period, and another to identify all the conditions that surpass the cost-effectiveness threshold for testing everyone with that condition. On the cost-effectiveness point, Healthy Livers, Healthy Lives seeks to overcome resistance from medical specialties who argue that the current options are too imperfect for universal use. We don't talk about public policy and MASLD very much on this podcast, except when somebody named Jeff, usually Lazarus, sometimes McIntyre, is with us, or when we're discussing regulatory decisions. This conversation moves fast and covers a broad range of issues, so just sit back, listen, learn, absorb. When you're done, join the conversation in our LinkedIn discussion group. Jeff, I don't know that this requires a ton of preface. But it's important to note that there's been momentum behind this disease in several different directions, obviously drug development and the movement from biopsies to NITs, which is part of what we're going to talk about several ways today. But I think one of the important things has been the increase in awareness of the disease and its place in the metabolic spectrum, and the degree to which these are really policy issues and cannot be addressed simply by having doctors treat patients better. You've been banging that drum for a while, loudly, in this disease after having done so in others, and it's great to see that it's all starting to have some effect. So with that, welcome, and tell us a little bit about what you've been up to in the Healthy Liver, Healthy Lives Coalition, please.
Jeffrey Lazarus.
Thanks, Roger. The way you describe it, it sounds very inspiring and exciting and full of good news. And in many ways, it is. Having our first drug ever is for MASH. A MASH indication is amazing. And we've had now 2 World Health Assembly side events in Geneva. So this is the first time on the sidelines of the World Health Assembly that we've been able to talk about steatotic liver disease. When we did this for viral hepatitis many years ago, both when I was at WHO and shortly thereafter, it eventually led to us getting invited inside. And that allowed us to have sometimes 30 seconds, sometimes up to 1 minute and 30 seconds to be able to speak about the importance of viral hepatitis at a regional meeting of WHO or even in the World Health Assembly itself. So it's a step in the right direction. The first of such meetings was held at the EASL office. That was over a year ago. We talked about it on the program. We had 2 ministers of health and the executive chair of the World Health Organization there, and a whole range of organizations, both patient advocacy and professional from around the world. And I think those meetings are incredibly important to do to apply pressure to ultimately have a seat at the table. My concern is that we're also still working to some extent in a bit of a bubble. There's a lot of excitement in the field. There's a few endocrinologists, and I'm very grateful to them, who also recognize the importance. And even at the American Diabetes Association at ADA last week, there were more liver specialists there. Zubair Younasi, Masen Noureddin, talking about steatotic liver disease. But we have really a long way to go. And that's why the Healthy Livers, Healthy Lives Coalition is so important. It brings together 4 professional organizations, AASLD and EASL, along with the Asian Pacific Association for the Study of the Liver, APASL, and the Latin American Association for the Study of the Liver, ALE, as well as other partners who are collaborating with us in Oslo, where we launched the event last year. That's the Indian National Association for the Study of the Liver, and others, too many really to list right now. But the idea is that the professional societies collaborate around something we all agree on, which is the importance of raising awareness, both within the liver field, and that includes raising awareness in our hospitals, in our clinics, at our conferences, but also taking it outside and going to the obvious first stops of endocrinology, obesity, management, but even primary care and cardiology.
Jörn Schattenberg.
And I think those are well taken points. When I started by saying that professional news was that Jeff stepped down from the EASL committee, I think the good news is that, his work over the last 4 or 5 years there really allowed for EASL to propose such a multi-stakeholder coalition, leading in the end to a worldwide coalition promoting liver disease. And the points Jeff mentioned last is, cardiology, other doctors to really think about this disease and start maybe testing, referring, or taking a liver angle in this that is beyond, I have elevated enzymes, I have to stop the statin, which is probably the way most physicians do see this, and not really recognize disease burden, quality of life, and management aspects around liver disease. So I think that's really something I'm excited to be part of this, and I think it builds on Jeff's experience. And I was going to ask you, Jeff, because you've had that, you mentioned it briefly in HIV and Hep C, right? And I think the momentum that was able to be built there is something we can leverage here. And maybe some of the learnings you had are interesting for us.
We can absolutely learn from what's happened in those fields and many others, even diabetes and cancer. But it's incredibly important to stress the central role of clinicians alongside patient advocates. No one else is going to do our job for us. So if the patient advocates aren't organized and speaking out, and they are increasingly so, we're not going to get anywhere. But if the professional societies aren't collaborating, we're also not going to get anywhere. It's professional societies that often are able to reach ministries of health, the World Health Organization and others in a different way, and create some of these large collaborations also along with other specialties and along with other patient advocacy groups. So that means bringing in diabetes, cancer, obesity, along with the liver organizations. So Healthy Livers, Healthy Lives is really trying to be an open, transparent, engaging, ambitious, and aspirational coalition. It has a light structure, so it's governed by 3 representatives of each of those 4 societies I mentioned, EASL, AASLD, APASL, and ALE, including representatives of each of the governing boards. And we have a couple of key things we're going to focus on in the next year and a half. That includes, I would say, in addition to meetings at our own conferences, it includes a focus on World Liver Day on April 19th. It includes a focus on the World Health Assembly and having a side event there. And then we'll also contribute to other activities. And maybe a little later, I'd like to share about the plans for the first UN General Assembly side event that's now in the works.
Louise, comment, question. I've got a few, but you go first.
Louise Campbell.
I've agreed with everything Jeff's been doing with the Healthy Liver, Healthy Lives for a very long time, in the context that poor liver health is a big part of a lot of the diseases that Jeff discusses. And when we talk about our end as hepatology, it's the end stage, it's the more advanced fibrosis, and we need to tweak them out. So I'm interested that we can take those learnings from HIV and hepatitis and all of those other areas. And I think you have the 90-90-90 shared program with the HIV that works. I'm not too sure how we would leverage that into, even if it was just cirrhosis, knowing 50% of our cirrhotics and 50%. So our numbers would probably be a lot lower, but that's a great initiative that works very, very well. So
we have a couple things, I think, Louise, in response to that. One is we have a project going on now looking at what will it take to double the number of diagnosed, so doubling the diagnosis. So within the next 3 to 4 years, what will it take to double those numbers? We've done some modeling. We've looked at how many more people need to be tested in primary care, in endocrinology, and even some in hepatology, because although we'd like to refer the right people to hepatology, some will get tested or diagnosed for the first time in hepatology. So we've done this for 4 countries, and then we're setting out what a vision would look like to double. That's something. Why double? Because it's easy. Double the diagnosed. It's easy to remember. It follows a little bit like what we did with Find the Missing Millions for viral hepatitis. There were lots of millions, but we just said the missing millions, and that caught on. So doubling the diagnosed is one initiative that we're going to roll out this autumn. The other, I was discussing with my team today, we were looking at HIV, and in 2013, I published a piece on indicator condition guided HIV testing. And there were more than 25 conditions where more than 1% of the people with that condition were shown to have HIV, which passes the cost effectiveness threshold for testing everyone there. So this was based on a large cohort study called HIDES over many years. And then we published the list. And it was interesting to go to rheumatology, neurology, even dentistry, and say, if you're finding people with this particular disease, you should test them for HIV. What are some of these? Some of them are very obvious, right? Tuberculosis, Kaposi sarcoma. But recommendations came very late, even for the obvious conditions, and very, very late for the ones that we were showing more than a 1% prevalence. So we're looking now at the World Health Organization's best buys. What are the cost-effective interventions? Because that's often what politicians and decision makers need to hear. It may make good sense. It may be good for health, but they need to hear that it's cost-effective. And we're running analysis, for example, like, is it cost-effective to screen and diagnose everyone with type 2 diabetes? We know that the prevalence is often 60 or even 70%. The prevalence of MASLD, fibrosis, will be a little lower. But what will it take to convince decision makers to put out a recommendation and say, actually, we should test everyone? And mind you, there's resistance. There's resistance from endocrinologists. There's also resistance from hepatologists, because with the NITs we have and the high, but still not high enough sensitivity and specificity, some people will be missed and some people will be referred who don't have MASLD. That's the current situation. So like you said in your introduction, Roger, we have great progression from the liver biopsy to the NITs. I mean, just compared to 5 or 10 years ago, or even 3 years ago, but a long way to go. But I don't think that should hinder us in trying to find people who have that advanced fibrosis, who need a pharmacological intervention, or who need support for the non-pharmaceutical interventions like diet and exercise.
And now, back to Roger.
We hope you've enjoyed this recording. If you have any questions or comments about the content of this conversation or the entire episode, please put them in the reviews section of the page from which you downloaded this conversation, or send an email to questions@surfingmash.com. Next week, Louise will be moderating an episode about challenges in communication between patient and provider and its implications on other systems issues. I'll miss the taping, but cannot wait to hear what emerges. Until then, stay safe, surf on. We'll see you on the podcast. Bye-bye now.